Shell was the dividend nobody thought could break. Through oil crashes, through recessions, through the 70s, it just kept paying. Then 2020 happened, and the board cut it for the first time since the Second World War. So, the question I care about is this: what would it take for that to happen again? And it turns out something gives way first, something that moves months before your income does. I bought SHEL, the first energy company I've ever owned. And I didn't know it was there. Quick one first, this isn't advice. I'm showing you my workings. Please do your own research before you put money anywhere. So, what does SHEL's dividend actually cost? Not as a percentage, in cash, because that's the number that either gets paid or doesn't. Every quarter, SHEL writes a check to its shareholders. Across a full year, it adds up to the figure on your screen. It's a real bill, and it lands whether oil is expensive or cheap. And the order that cash moves in matters more than any ratio. The money comes in from operations, the cash the business generates from selling what it produces. Out of that, SHEL has to pay to keep the wells and the plants running, because an energy company that stops investing stops existing. Whatever survives both of those is what's available to hand back, and the dividend comes out of that. Which brings me to the question everyone asks about a dividend and hardly anyone checks properly. Does the cash cover it? There's one number for this, and I keep coming back to it on this channel: dividend cover. It's simple enough. Take what the company earns and divide it by what it pays out. Cover of 1 means every penny earned walks straight back out of the door. Cover of 2 means it earns twice what it hands over, so it can take a real hit and still pay you. The line I use here is 1.5. There's a whole episode on why, and it's linked below. SHEL today clears that, the exact figures on screen, because it moves with earnings. Now put that next to 2019, the year before the cut. SHEL was paying out very nearly everything it earned. So the warning was there 12 months early. It just wasn't in the yield, and it wasn't in the share price. And the year after that, the math stopped meaning anything. SHEL lost money and paid a dividend anyway. Which means if I want to know whether this dividend is safe now, I need to understand what actually pushed it over then. So, what did? 3 things happened at once, and it took all 3. The first is the one everybody remembers. Demand for oil didn't dip in 2020, it fell off a cliff. Planes grounded, roads empty, and the price of a barrel went with it. The second is the one almost nobody mentions. SHEL walked into that year carrying a lot of debt. Some of it went back to the BG Group deal, which roughly tripled what the company owed. SHEL measures that with gearing. How much of the business is funded by borrowing rather than by shareholders? Going into 2020, it was high, and the numbers on screen. And the third is the part I find genuinely useful. The cash coming in was collapsing, that debt was still sitting there, and the board had a choice: protect the dividend or protect the balance sheet. They chose the balance sheet. So the till wasn't empty. They simply decided they'd rather cut the payment than borrow to keep it going. And you might be thinking that's a distinction, without a difference. If you held the shares, your income fell either way. That's fair. But it matters, because it tells you exactly what to watch. It wasn't the oil price on its own that did it. It was the oil price arriving on top of a balance sheet that couldn't take it. How does that balance sheet look today? Debt first, because that's the part that did the damage. Gearing was high going in. It's a long way below that now, and both figures are on screen. Some of that is the cut itself. Slashing the payment freed up an enormous amount of cash, and some of it is years of deliberately paying debt down. Either way, the pile came off. So the balance sheet that couldn't take it last time has real slack in it now, enough to ride out a bad year without going near the payment. Which ought to be the end of it. Except that I went back through where the cash goes, and there was something sitting in that queue I'd walked straight past. So, what gives first? Go back to that queue, cash in, capital spending out, and whatever survives both is what's available to hand back. That list is what I'd been carrying round in my head all week, and it's wrong. I told you the dividend comes out of what survives. What I didn't tell you is that it isn't the only thing that does. Because I hadn't spotted it either. There are 2 claims on that money, and the bigger one isn't the dividend. Shell also buys back its own shares, quarter after quarter, and it spends far more doing that than it spends paying you. Here's why that matters if you're in this for income. A buyback is discretionary. Management can slow it down or stop it altogether, and they don't have to hold a press conference to do it. A dividend is the opposite. Boards will defend one long past the point where it's comfortable, because cutting it is an admission. So the buyback is the shock absorber. If the cash coming in starts to squeeze, that's the thing that gives, and the dividend carries on behind it, which makes the buyback the early warning light. When it slows, the pressure has already arrived, months before anything reaches your income. And that sharpens the question I started with. How much has to go wrong before Shell runs out of things it can stop first? None of that is a forecast. Last full year, Shell paid to keep itself running, and what was left still covered the dividends several times over. That figure's on screen straight out of Shell's own filings. Working back from 2020, one thing going wrong isn't enough. The cash coming in would have to fall and stay down. Not a bad week, not a bad month, long enough that Shell couldn't just borrow its way through it. And the balance sheet would have to be in no state to absorb it. That's the part that's changed most. So I'm watching three things, and not one of them is the yield. They're on your screen, and the buyback sits at the top. If those three stay roughly where they are, the payment is doing what it's supposed to do. If two of them turn at the same time, that's 2020 again. So, is Shell's dividend safe? Here's where I've landed, and then it's yours. The record says this dividend can break, because it already has. The queue says something large and entirely optional stands in front of it, and that's what goes first. And the balance sheet says there's far more room to absorb a shock than there was last time. None of that adds up to safe, or adds up to covered. For now, with a warning light, I finally know how to read, and I'd rather own it understanding the difference. The next payment date's on screen if you're weighing it up. Now you're watching the same three things I am. If you're building a UK dividend portfolio, subscribe. It genuinely helps. And tell me below, what's your warning light? Happy investing.